So if you want to propagate avocados or most commercial fruit varieties, one thing to consider is that if I want to grow a Hass, for example, like a Hass avocado, and I take a Hass avocado, I eat it, I take the pit, I plant the pit in the ground, the fruit that the pit will produce will not be Hass avocados, because Hass is not a species of avocado, it's one particular tree that was copied multiple times, over and over and over again, and most commercial varieties in the world are Hass. And so what you're going to do is literally just take a piece of the tree that you want, which is called the scion, and then you connect it to the tree that you're sprouting, which is called the rootstock. And so the first step would be to collect the seeds and then start sprouting them so that you can graft them later. So I sprouted the rootstock by collecting avocado pits and then keeping them moist in a pile of sawdust or rice hulls or something like similar material like mulch that can hold moisture. And you keep them in there for a few weeks, and then eventually you'll see this tail come out, which is the taproot. And when it starts and the top splits, you know it's ready to plant. And so then I transfer it to a soil bag, about a 50-50 mixture of just regular soil and compost. And then you'll leave it here for a few months until the rootstock becomes large enough to graft. You look for a branch. You're just trying to get the very tip, the bud, at the very end here. That's where it's growing from. And you're looking for something that's about the width of a pencil, so it's fairly developed already. And it should all be from one growth year. And you can see how last year's growth kind of ends, and this is sort of grayer, knobbier wood, and then it's bright green from that point down. And so you just want the new growth. And what you do is you can use scissors or anything to cut it. It doesn't have to be very precise because you'll do the finer work with the rootstock. You just cut it off, and then you can pick or cut the branches off because the leaves will transpire and lose water, and while it's healing you don't want it to be losing water. So it'll grow back the leaves at the buds, but for now you want to get rid of them. But this is a good specimen because it's fairly straight and it's fairly thick and it looks pretty healthy. It's not scratched up or covered in fungus or anything. And then this is what you're ending up with, and this is what you'll graft with. So the process of grafting is not super complicated, but it is important that you understand what you're doing so that you can do it effectively to increase the chance that your tree will survive. But ultimately what you're trying to do is put the scion wood, which is the bud that I cut from the scion tree, onto the rootstock. And the rootstock is the seedling that I've sprouted. And what's important here is that they should be about the same size, so about the thickness of a pencil. If one is much larger than the other, they won't line up well. And what you are trying to do ultimately is you are lining up the cambium, which is the layer just inside the bark of the tree, just inside the skin. It's just one thin layer of growing tissue, and that's what will align with the cambium of the rootstock. And then because the trees are so physiologically similar, the tree will recognize the new cambium as just a wound, as if it had been cut, and it'll heal itself back together. And then the scion will keep growing off of the energy from the rootstock. And then it will produce whatever fruit the scion came from. And so the first step is to whittle in a wedge shape on the scion. It takes a few times to get the hang of it. Yeah, but you could use something like that. The next step is to cut the rootstock, and you want to leave, again, at least 10 centimeters or so, like at least this much. You don't want to leave a whole bunch, because if any of these leaves are still on after you've grafted and they grow, they're still genetically the rootstock, and so they would still produce fruit of the rootstock and not fruit of the scion. So you have to do it below the leaves, or if there are leaves, then you would cut them, because you just don't want any growth to carry the genes of the rootstock. You want it all to be the scion. So I would cut it like about here. If you cut it too high, it starts getting really skinny too, and it becomes more difficult. So somewhere around here. And this is important that you use a sharp cutting implement, because if you hack at it and fray the fibers too much, it's possible to make it too injured and it won't be able to heal properly. But it should be a nice clean cut. So you're doing a T cut, which is the top part of the T is like horizontal, and the vertical cut is down into it. And you want to do it pretty slowly and gently because you can always cut more, but you can't uncut if something's been cut. And then you're just going to fit your wedge into the gap that you've created. It should just slide in. There you go. You can make sure that it is flush, that it goes right to the bottom of the cut. And it would stay in there without any, as long as it doesn't get bumped or anything, but it's good to seal it so that there's no air getting in. And you can use tape or just like thin, malleable plastic. And you are just going to wrap it sort of like you would wrap a wound on a tree. That's ultimately what it is. And you want to keep it pretty tight so that you don't get any air in. This will help hold it closed too. And you get towards the end, you can tie it off. I can make a little bit of slack at the very end and pull the tail through. Okay. And then make sure it's going to hold. You can trim it for aesthetics, mostly. But then what you have is the scion grafted to the rootstock. And then you can cover it with a plastic covering, which helps keep anything like gunk from getting in, or water so it doesn't mold or anything. But I just used utensil covers from a restaurant in town, like what they put the fork and spoon and knife in. But you could use anything that was equivalent, basically. So it's just a little sheath, basically. And it should totally cover the tape. And there you go. And then this will just sit in the greenhouse and we'll water it until it starts to show buds. And then after at least 4 weeks, it depends on how fast it heals, how good the union is, you'll be able to unwrap the tape and you'll see just like a pretty clean wedge where it's all fused around the cambium, and you'll know that it's been successful the first time that you see little leaf buds. And this one has all started to grow. And so as long as no new shoots come beneath the cut, then this will all be just the scion tree.